What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Johners. This is episode 76, and we've got a special guest with us this week. I'll introduce that special guest host very, very shortly. Today, we're going to be concentrating. We're going to be looking at quite a few things that's happening within the wrestling world over the last few days. On Thursday, of course, we had Crown Jewel, the WWE pay-per-view from Saudi Arabia. Lots of different opinions about whether it was a good show, bad show, the ending of the main events, and all the various happenings in all the matches there. So we look forward to getting into that very, very shortly. We're also going to be covering off this week's NXT and AEW Dynamite. And finishing off with, we're going to be having a little bit of a chat about what happened last night on Smackdown, because quite a few interesting things happened there. Some fresh faces from a certain company that we're going to be talking about very, very soon turned up, and the reasons why they were there will be making apparent as well. We'll be kind of discussing that. But first of all, as I like to do every single week, is to throw out my plugs so you know where to find Wrestling with Johners on social media. If you're on Twitter, you can find us. Our Twitter handle is @withjohners_pod. That's @withjohners_pod. On Instagram, go out and find us. We're @Wrestling with Johners. That's instagram.com/Wrestling with Johners. Go out and search our ever popular, fun, friendly, and interactive Facebook community page. Just search Wrestling with Johners, and that's Johners spelled JOHNERS. And we've been doing a bit of work to our YouTube channel of late. So go out and search our YouTube channel. Just simply search Wrestling with Johners. I've got every single one of our podcast episodes up there, including all of our video casts and live interviews with various guests, such as Gary Michael Capetta, former WCW ring announcer, and former WWE ring referee Jimmy Corderas, of course. So go and check out our YouTube page as well, and don't forget to hit subscribe. This is the only podcast for all of your weekly NXT, AEW, NXT UK and WWE needs. So yeah, for all of your all-round pro wrestling needs. So please spread the word. Please tell your friends and tell your family. Don't forget to subscribe to all of our social media channels, and yeah, don't forget to follow the Wrestling with Johners podcast on YouTube and Spotify and Apple. But we're only 1 week away, by the way, from our first anniversary. So in 1 week's time, we'll be celebrating the Wrestling with Johners' first birthday. We'll be joined by guest host Kurt Johansson, formerly of the Wrestle Thoughts podcast. Now he's part of the Ringsider team, and they're getting that up and running as we speak, with some brilliant podcast content from those guys. But Kurt will be joining me next weekend for our first anniversary episode, and it'll be a special Ask Johners Q&A special. So if you have any questions you want to get in for me or Kurt for next week's Ask Johners Q&A special, our birthday anniversary edition, then please do so. You can email any questions to wrestlingwithjohners@gmail.com, or just comment to any of our Facebook groups or any of our Twitter links. As mentioned, we're at withjohners_pod on Twitter. So that'll be a very, very exciting episode dropping next Saturday. But without further ado, this is really going to confuse our listeners because I've got a fellow podcaster on the line, and his name is also John Scott. So, John Scott, thank you very much for coming on the Wrestling with Johners podcast, buddy. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. And yeah, it's great to be here. I've been listening to you guys for a little while now. So, yeah, I think I reached out to you a little while ago and said, hang on a minute, we've both got the same name, we're both doing the same thing. Very uncanny.
Did you think it was like a bogus account and somebody was trying to
I thought,
like a fan account of yours or a fake account or something?
I thought I can't be that famous just yet, surely.
But you are getting that way, because you've got a podcast, as I mentioned. It's called Wrestle Line Podcast. Yep. You're also very active on YouTube with your Wrestle Line TV channel. So tell us a bit about your podcasting activity, how it's kind of transitioned into YouTube with the TV channel, and you do a lot of interviews. I've seen quite a few interviews of yours, most recently with one of my favourite wrestlers, Paul Robinson, current Progress champion. What's the name of the bout these? Proteus. Yeah. Oh, I always get that one confused, but yeah, it's one of my favourites. And so tell us a bit about your podcasting career and how that's developed then, John.
Yeah, so the podcast started about 5 years ago now, and literally started just by doing some interviews. We had Diana Hart on, we had Daniel Puder, Sheldon Goldberg, just a real random bunch of people to begin with, I guess, around the circle. And then from there, we just was going weekly with just reviews on the podcast. And after that, pretty much evolved into where it's at today, which is we're now going towards video content. And of course, Wrestle Line, which you can find on YouTube currently, which is basically us now going around to a lot of shows. We've been doing Ring of Honor recently, lots of Progress Wrestling in that, and a lot of our sort of independent shows in and around Essex, like Wrestle Force and All Star Wrestling as well, who's been around for almost forever, as far as I'm aware.
Yes.
I think it's their 50th year next year, believe it or not.
That's outstanding. You've got a co-host as well. So who's that you co-host with?
Yeah, I better give him a plug. Also, he'll definitely be upset. That's Matt Essex. We haven't found a double for him yet. That's what we're waiting for. He's been there all the way with me as well. And we're just sort of two passionate wrestling fans, much like yourselves, I'm sure. And we just decided, like, let's go on with this and let's create our own channel and let's get around there and get ourselves there. So that's pretty much where we're at the moment.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You've been doing it for 5 years. I mean, that's pretty good because, podcasting has really exploded over the last few years. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of independent podcasts, a lot of more mainstream podcasts. And I thought, let's give it a go. I've got about nearly 28 years of wrestling experience or wrestling fandom under my belt. And I thought, I could probably share my passion and love for wrestling. But let's talk a little bit about your wrestling fandom then, John. So I've been a wrestling fan nearly all my life. But tell me a little bit about how you first came across wrestling. Did you stumble across it? Did you have like friends that are into it that kind of had old VHS tapes? And so kind of what were your first memories of becoming a wrestling fan then, John?
Well, my first memory, believe it or not, I was up one night, not well, as a kid, and there just happened to be, I think it might have been a Royal Rumble on Sky Box Office. And the first tag team I saw come out was the Road Warriors.
Nice.
And I was just hooked, because they're so elaborate, it was so over the top, and it was like they looked just totally cool, and it just hooked me right from the first moment. And then the figures came, obviously, like most people. Figures were so much different, I think, back then when I was a boy as a fan to what they are now. Like, the places you'd find figures was much more mainstream than it is now. You've got to kind of go to sort of meticulous toy shops now and places to get that. But back then, you could probably get it pretty much anywhere. I just remember aisles and aisles of the stuff, and WCW, which I was always disappointed with those figures because they were stuck.
You couldn't move the arms and couldn't move the legs.
No, that was it. So, but guys with face paint were like my in thing. So Sting was relatively like a good thing. But as I got older, I really started to become a huge Bret Hart fan, and still am to this day in a lot of ways. Probably my sort of favorite out and out wrestler of all times. I happened to be at Wembley '92, which was just amazing. The experience of Wembley Stadium. And of course,
same here. I was there.
And the crazy thing about it was that, if you think back to 1992 and you think how much in this country from that moment has happened for the WWE market in this country, it all kind of stems from Wembley '92, that SummerSlam. It's just sort of had so many people enthralled by the British Bulldog and Bret Hart in that main event. It was pretty much a magical moment.
It was so hot, wasn't it? It was such a hot period. I mean, '91 when Bulldog won the Battle Royal at Albert Hall. I mean, I think it started touring around 1991. So and then through to SummerSlam. And it just exploded. I mean, my memories from that event at Wembley is as vivid today as it was back then. It was a really hot, lovely sunny day, and it was noise the whole 3 or 4 hours that we were there. And that main event was still to this day one of the best matches I've ever seen.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing, as you get older, you appreciate different things. And looking back on it, it's it definitely still stands the test of time, that main event, pretty much to anybody. So that was sort of me growing up being a wrestling fan. Pretty much Bret Hart, the Hart Foundation, any of those guys. I was huge fans of those. And I think later on I did watch some WCW as a kid, but pretty much a WWE guy. Growing up through school and into the Attitude Era when it was cool to like wrestling.
Indeed.
I'm not so sure nowadays, but back then when Steve Austin come along, suddenly I was the cool kid when I was about 14. Up until that point, I wasn't the cool kid, But Steve Austin comes along and it's suddenly okay, it's acceptable.
It is, yeah, definitely. So looking at more kind of modern times then, John, you obviously go to a lot of wrestling shows, you interview a lot of wrestlers at these wrestling shows. So what sort of promotions do you like to follow, and what sort of wrestlers kind of are kind of on your top 5 list at the moment? Who do you really like to follow and enjoy their style or promo ability or whatever it might be about them?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of promotions. I've got to say, for this country, I think we're blessed at the moment with so many promotions.
We are lucky, yeah.
You just every weekend it's full, it's packed up and down the country. You're not going to have an empty weekend, which is just amazing considering where we come from. I can remember being a fan of the FWA and turning up at York Hall every week, and that was just sort of one thing on its own. But now you look how far all that's come, and a lot of those guys are still around today, still quite active as well, some of those guys. I recently had Johnny Storm on, as a matter of fact, and he looks like he hasn't aged as well. Other than his hair, he's exactly the same as I remember him back in the FWA.
Awesome.
But I think in terms of what I enjoy now, I tend to go back a lot. So I've been sort of a bit of a mark for the sort of old 70s territory system.
Really? Wow.
And just sort of going back and watching how all that operated, and Georgia Championship Wrestling and Stampede especially, are very ahead of its time, I think, in a lot of ways. And I've enjoyed a lot of that. And I think a lot of wrestlers will say the same, that what was sort of old then can become new now, and that mentality. So you do see a lot of wrestlers sort of going back to that era to sort of see what they can come up with, if there's something that, might catch on with them in today's market. And I think in terms of wrestlers I enjoy now, there's so much talent, I mean, just in the UK alone, there is so much talent. Who you mentioned earlier, Paul Robinson, I mean, he's local with me. He only lives in Southend. I'm literally down the road. So I've watched him on all the sort of small indie shows, and to see how and where he's gone with his character and I'll say this much: Paul Robinson is Paul Robinson.
Really? Wow! Yeah. Outside of the ring and inside the ring, unbelievable!
Yeah,
wow!
You're not getting away from that. But yeah, I mean, I enjoy so much of the wrestling. NXT is a massive thing of mine. Ever since that's come around, it's given me a sort of new refresh to get back into wrestling a little bit more. I like the style. I am a little bit worried about where it's going to go now. In terms of the product that they had, whether it will change. But I'm a huge NXT fan. Progress Wrestling, can't say enough good things about them as well. They do such an outstanding job and professional looking job with their shows. So yeah, I would say I'm pretty much an all-round sort of wrestling fan. I take bits and pieces out of each. I love the whole new NWA Power.
I was going to ask you about that, John, because
radar.
That's it, because you mentioned earlier about how you're a bit of a mark for some of the 70s stuff, and this is a bit of a throwback to the 70s and 80s with the studio vibe and having that small crowd kind of atmosphere. And I mean, I've seen every episode of NWA Power on YouTube, and it's just up there, one of my favorite shows of the week. And I think that the opportunity they give the wrestlers in terms of the mic time and being able to be themselves, and the matches have been pretty solid as well, but the character development and everything about it's been spot on so far. And it is a bit of a throwback, but it's also mixing the throwback with 2019. I think it really works.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's got a nice retro feel to it. And the only thing with NWA Power, I like it, but I wonder. I did sit with somebody who's a lot younger than me, and they didn't get it at all. They could not see it, and so I don't know if it's just for us, for the fans that are just sort of want that old stuff, if it's just tailored for me, or whether new younger fans will be like, okay, I'm going to give this a go. This is different. But what I will say is they definitely have got identity, which is very, very important, I would say, to any promotion at the moment, going head to head with anybody. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to more seeing where they go and how that evolves over time.
Yeah. Well, John, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today. I also asked you to kind of watch a lot of wrestling in preparation for this podcast today as well. So you probably had enough of me sending you messages saying, we need to talk about this, we need to talk about that. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, we are going to be kind of delving into and talking about the top line stuff that happened on Thursday with Crown Jewel. We'll talk about that very, very shortly. obviously 2 hours of AEW, 2 hours of NXT. There was also a couple of hours of Smackdown last night, and if you watch Raw on a Monday and various other shows, MLW, NWA, as we mentioned, there's so much wrestling packed into the weekly calendar for the average wrestling fan that, I mean, where do your priorities lie? What do you kind of have to watch every single week, and what's kind of dropped off your radar a little bit?
I think for us, we tend to go where our audience goes, and at the moment, there is definitely a lot of buzz around AEW for obvious reasons.
Sure.
I think a lot of people just want that something different, and they want it to work, they want it to succeed. That's the difference with the WWE product at the minute. So we tend to focus at the moment. We're looking at Wednesday nights. I mean, it is just such a how do you do it? And for us in the UK, it's a little bit harder because we've got a little bit of a delay. Depends how you get around it. So it's quite challenging, I would say, for us on the podcast at the minute, because we really, and with Smackdown moving to Friday as well, it's like, wow, you've really got, and then you get a crown jewel placed in there. It's just like, where do you start? But for the most part, I mean, Raw and Smackdown have been the main ones that we concentrate. But what we tend to do now is focus also a lot on sort of the independent stuff, because I think the exposure that we give on our YouTube channel, a lot of our podcast listeners tend to find it quite interesting that there is a market going on within the UK and where are these guys. And you see a lot of guys now that they've been signed to NXT UK very, very fast. It's not like it used to be. I think the door and the access to get there is much, much smoother. So NXT UK is a massive thing to that. And we certainly get a lot of people, especially our European listeners, sort of all wanting to find out, will they get one? Is it just going to be a Japan? Because I know that there was talks about them trying to do a Japan NXT. Those kind of things. I think it's kind of wherever the buzz is coming from, that's where we probably prioritize ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but if you covered everything, it would be a 10-hour show every single week. So you do need to know where to cut your cloth. But let's have a little chat about Crown Jewel then,
Yep.
John. So I'm guessing you've seen the show or highlights from the show. It's quite an interesting show, and personally, I think it was probably the best show they've done from all the Saudi events, in my opinion. A lot of other people's opinion as well. On the pre-show, you had Humberto Carrillo winning the pre-show battle royal to go on to face AJ Styles for the US title later on. In the opening match, the opening match was quite interesting. And it kicked off with Brock Lesnar defending his WWE Championship against Cain Velasquez. So the interesting thing is, first of all, that they opened the show. Now, Brock Lesnar's done this before this year at WrestleMania, so he's not unfamiliar to opening a big show such as this. But interestingly, this is Cain Velasquez. I mean, obviously, we know about Cain Velasquez's UFC history and the fact that was it 9 years ago he won the UFC Heavyweight Championship from Brock Lesnar. So they do have this ready-built storyline, this history between the two of them. But he's only had two pro wrestling matches ahead of Thursday night, both of which were six-man tags, I believe, for AAA. So this was his first ever match in the WWE and his first ever singles match in a pro wrestling ring in the pro wrestling world. And it did have it was an interesting match. It had a shoot feel to it. It did have a shoot match feel to it. They were trying to replicate a bit of a UFC vibe to try to bring in that audience or to please that audience, I suppose. But the match ended very, very quickly. It only went just over 2 minutes, and Brock won the match via a Kimura lock, and Cain Velasquez tapped out. Now, Cain Velasquez has only been in WWE for a few weeks. When Smackdown debuted on Fox on the 4th of October is when he made his debut. An unexpected shock moment there. But he's not had a good run of things. In fact, he's been beaten down most weeks, especially when he comes face-to-face with Brock Lesnar. Lost this match in 2 minutes. Bit of an interesting opener, a bit of an interesting way to open the show. What were your thoughts on this one, John?
Well, with regards to Brock opening the show, it doesn't surprise me because I always feel like he wants to get out as soon as he can. So his plane's probably running as soon as the
his
match
private
starts.
Jet was on the runway, ready to go.
That's why he made it back in time.
He did.
But I didn't have a problem so much with it going on first. I think in a lot of ways it might have made sense. I felt one thing, and I know we'll talk about the rest as we go on, but one thing I felt the pacing of the card was much better. Normally, the Saudi Arabia shows, the pacing of it has been all over the place and you can fade in and out. but I felt like they structured this a lot better. And so having Brock and Cain Velasquez out, you didn't want it anywhere near sort of the Tyson Fury stuff either, because very similar in a lot of ways what they were trying to do there. So yeah, it was very short. I mean, 2 minutes is not a great thing, but then sometimes, you know, little is more in many ways. I think with Cain Velasquez, I think WWE may have been protecting him somewhat as well. I'm not sure if he was 100%. I know I've heard rumors that he needs, I think it's stem cell surgeries and stuff like this to still happen. So, but yeah, a loss on his first match. It probably doesn't sound the most ideal thing, but then it is Brock Lesnar, who, you know, has just won that WWE title. I thought maybe they're going to do a Goldberg type situation.
I thought the same, yeah.
Where, you know, he's his kryptonite, and this will run in maybe to next year. But, you know, they've ended it quite, you know, fast and dramatically. And to me, it wasn't as if the match ended and I thought, oh, what's going to happen next? I took that as that done for now. And they'll move on with Rey Mysterio and Brock, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, overall, I didn't really have too much of a problem with it. I wasn't too bugged out. I know a lot of our listeners felt it was too short and, you know, they booked this for so long. But for me, I kind of saw that coming, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was the best possible outcome, and the kind of the 2 minutes I think suited it well. It had that element of reality. It did have a shoot fight feel, and I think you mentioned the Goldberg situation from Survivor Series a couple of years ago, where he beat Brock Lesnar in 90 seconds, and then they kind of built through to a storyline for the following WrestleMania, and I thought that was very effective. I've got a feeling they're going to do something similar here as well, to be honest with you. In the next match, you had a tag team turmoil, which featured the OC, Viking Raiders, New Day, the Revival, B Team, Heavy Machinery, Ziggler and Rude, Zack Ryder and Hawkins, and the Lucha House Party. And it ended with the OC winning the whole thing. I think they pinned the Viking Raiders last. So both tag team champions, the Revival and the Viking Raiders, kind of didn't win the tournament, but it was refreshing that a different team kind of overcame instead of a champion or an existing champion. It also gives the OC a bit more of a push, and kind of builds into a bit of a storyline, because they're a raw tag team to possibly challenge the Viking Raiders for the tag titles. Then you've got what many people are saying was possibly the match of the night, which was Mansoor versus Cesaro. Now Cesaro seems to be kind of wheeled out for these sort of matches to be the fall guy to these up and coming wrestlers, or if ever they need an experienced hand to put somebody over or to put a bit of a shine on somebody, and that certainly happened in this case. But I mean, I've praised Mansoor on my podcast before, many times before, when we've seen him on the odd occasion on NXT, and on the previous Saudi shows, and he did very well here. It was a very good match, and he won the match cleanly via a moonsault, and the match went just over 12 minutes. So the crowd were so into this, and they were so into Mansoor and the fact that he won, but that afterwards he delivered a fantastic promo in English and in his own native language, it was a good feel-good moment. So what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think with this, I won't say, you know, I definitely thought he was winning. It seems like WWE, anywhere they take the roster and there might be a homegrown talent, they normally lose. But in Mansoor's case, it's the opposite. They go with a win. They want the home crowd, which I think makes perfect sense, quite frankly. I mean, and like you say, Cesaro, I mean, I think you might have been at the show in Cardiff. Was you there when he was there? And similar kind of thing. I mean, Cesaro is just so underrated and so good at making guys look better, you know, even more better than what they are. And he, you know, he's got that about him. I kind of feel for Cesaro a little bit in the sort of position he's in currently, because I just don't see him getting out of it at the moment. But I mean, overall, it's a feel good moment. It's what you look at all those kids in the crowd, all the inspiring people. Like we was talking about Wembley at the start of this show, what it was to us, this is a similar thing that this will probably have. You know, you'll have people 20 years time like us possibly doing a similar thing and saying this is where it started for me. So it definitely makes sense to have this. I think the only feedback I've read where people are a little bit, it's too cheesy, you know, it's too perfect, he won the run, you know, I get that, and I think it's just because we've been educated that way as WWE fans. We have been educated that everything you think should happen doesn't anymore. And so I just think that's all it is. But overall, I was happy. I thought the performance was great from Mansoor. I mean, I hope that WWE do a little bit more with him on, US soil, because it seems like they only built this in just as it was coming up to the show. I think that's the only disappointing thing about it. It's like, where has he been? I know he's done other things, but his exposure hasn't been there as much as it probably should be. But hopefully this will be the platform for it.
Yeah, they can't just wheel him out every time there's a Saudi show. Yeah. They need to capitalise on it. Maybe NXT on USA. There's a good opportunity to bring him out for the odd match, and hopefully we'll see more on that US soil fairly soon. Then we got a fairly strange match, Tyson Fury. I mean, you mentioned earlier about the Cain Velasquez kind of sports combat crossover in the opening match, and Tyson Fury being an undefeated heavyweight champion boxer going up against Braun Strowman. I wasn't really looking forward to this one coming into it, and to be honest with you, it didn't really deliver in my books. It was, I really don't want to see Tyson Fury in the WWE ring again, to be honest with you. Like I say, I think he's got a great personality, really good character. He can certainly carry his own on the mic, but I don't think a wrestling ring is really where he needs to be. But what's your thoughts?
My thoughts are that they pretty much wasted the opportunity with Tyson Fury in many ways. I think if you're going to have Tyson Fury, he needs a bit more leverage with the mic. I mean, you look at Tyson Fury in the boxing world, he's cutting promos better than most of the guys on the WWE roster. I mean, just for his own. But he gets into WWE and he's too scripted for my liking. There was that incident with the pen.
Oh dear!
And then that performance center video that went up, and I was just like, oh come on. Braun out of nowhere like an RKO or something, all 7 foot of him. And so I can't say I was really feeling it. I do feel like they've wasted the opportunity a lot. I watched them on an interview with, I think it was on Ariel Helwani's, where he was sitting with Triple H. And he asked the question I would have asked, which is, normally you only do this for WrestleMania. Why now? And I know Triple H said it was all about the timing. It's the fact that, Tyson Fury had a big cut and this was just something to do. I'm sure Tyson Fury's very happy with the payday out of it. I'll say that much. The entrance was extravagant, as you'd expect.
Oh, the entrance was
probably
amazing.
About the best thing of the entire match, in my opinion. But it was just a shame. I think having Tyson Fury and Cain Velasquez on one night, it sort of watered down both of them in a way. Yeah. It took away from both of them. And I know there was speculation that they were going to go with Tyson Fury and Brock. I think that would have had a little bit more interest from me. But when I found out it was Braun Strowman, I could only see there was one winner. And so I sort of, what's a shame is most of the people I spoke to, they didn't care who was winning and losing. And that was a shame, because I think most people had it, in pencil. Is Tyson Fury. He's not going to come into a wrestling ring and decide to lose. But like you say, it was the match itself. There were some moments in it where you did cringe. It wasn't the sort of thing I'd put on. The problem is I've got a lot of friends that aren't into wrestling, but they're into boxing. And of course they tuned in for this. So it was like, oh no, worst possible time to see it. I mean, again, they did their best to try and protect him. I think he probably thought he wanted to do more. I think he was trying to put all the effort in. You could tell he wasn't just turning up for a paycheck. But I think overall it was, I think it was just name. I think it was the name of Tyson Fury to be there, but that's all. It doesn't do anything for Braun Strowman, that's for sure. And the end result is, well, they had Tyson Fury there. That's about it. Whether we see him again, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was fairly obvious that Braun Strowman was protecting Tyson Fury. He was not laying in the full power with the body slams. He was really kind of looking after him, which is fine. You need to look after your opponent, and especially if he's a world champion boxer, you don't want to kind of break that that character, break that commodity, and hurt him for his next match, which I think he's got a match lined up for early next year. Yep. But it could have looked a little bit more realistic, could have looked a little bit more impactful in my opinion. Then we get to AJ Styles putting his US title on the line against the winner of the Battle Royal from earlier, Humberto Carrillo. This was a good match. I like the way that they've been highlighting Carrillo in recent weeks in a match against AJ Styles last week and the week before against Seth Rollins on Raw. So he's certainly getting, quite a bit of a push. He came down with an extravagant costume, like I say, having just won the Battle Royal. I thought this was a good match. AJ was the right winner at the end of the day. But I like the way they're pushing Carrillo, and I don't know who's kind of championing him behind the scenes, but whoever is definitely doing a good job. And it's good to see a good young talent like Humberto Carrillo come through.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's come out of nowhere, literally, and for a change, WWE have embraced it. They haven't just gone 1 week and then we don't see him again, which is what I thought might happen when we saw that week on Raw. I was pleased he won the match and got the match with AJ because, AJ can basically make a broom look good. He's that good. I love AJ as a heel at the moment. I think it's where he's most comfortable, especially back with with Gallows as well and Anderson. I just think he's perfect fit with those guys. And yeah, I mean, it was a good match. I mean, it's like you said, it's nice they're highlighting that for a change, and they're putting the emphasis where it should be. I just hope that I kind of got this feeling that you may just see Carrillo like back in the average range at the moment. I don't know. I've just got this funny feeling that WWE are going to be done with him for a little while and they'll move on, but hopefully not. Fingers crossed they won't be, because I think he's I wouldn't say he's going to be a main event star or anything like that just yet, but I think in that mid-tier he can definitely have a good run. You look at what Ricochet was doing much earlier in the year. I just hope he doesn't fall off like so many guys tend to when they get that early push.
Be interesting to see what they do with him next. I think he's got a great look and a great moveset. He's very smooth in the ring, very crisp. Then on to one of the big talking points going into Crown Jewel, and it was the first ever women's wrestling match to take place in Saudi Arabia. I think other wrestling companies have taken credit for having the first, but this is certainly the first under the WWE banner anyway. And it was big news when it broke. I think it broke possibly on the morning of the event itself. Natalya and Lacey Evans were chosen as the two competitors for this match. And I mean, I don't know about you, John, but I certainly had a bit of a lump in my throat. It was an emotional occasion. You could see the women tearing up in the ring, both on the entrances during the match and after the match. It was a very emotional sight. They had shots of people in the crowd, and it was a really good feel-good moment. And regardless of what you think of these two wrestlers, it was a historic moment. You could feel that. You can tell that. The match was okay, and I felt that Lacey and Natalya, although they've had several matches, one of which was actually pretty good, their last man standing match from a couple of weeks ago. But what were your thoughts on this one, and more importantly, what's your thoughts on kind of the occasion and the kind of the meaning of the whole match, basically?
Yeah, I liked the fact that obviously it's historical for WWE's point of view. They tried to do this last time and there was like a last minute where they pulled it. I believe the government stepped in and whatnot. So it was still up in the air for me until it got done. It wasn't done. I liked it. I think what they, finally it's done. What I would like to see when they return there is it be a match where it's built into the story and they focus on the match. Because I mean, Michael Cole, and everybody, you heard it so many times. It's the first ever. It's the first ever. It's the first ever. So we knew that much by the end of it. And I know that they were trying to drill that home. And I think both performers in there, like you said, they were both very emotional. I think it wasn't really about how good the match can be. It's like the fact they're doing it, which obviously made the most impact of the night. But I just hope they kind of move away from that. I remember at the first, I think when they had their first Royal Rumble for the women, unfortunately, most of the Rumble was spent about, oh, here comes Tori Wilson. Look what she's done for this Royal Rumble. And it was like they should be happy that they're in it kind of thing, as opposed to enjoying the moment of the story and who's going to win. So I think as long as that happens and it evolves the right way, and it's not always a thing about, well, we've got another women's match on, aren't we? Great. I think that'll be perfect. I think at the end of it, like you said, you look around the audience, you got cheering, females all there, and deep down what that means to them in terms of their culture and the way forward. So this is what WWE have wanted to do since they've got there. They've wanted to put one of these on. It's been a hard couple of years fighting for this. Of course, we had Renee turn up last time. as an announcer, which was quite a big thing. We know last time the match didn't happen, but I think to get that first one done, I think that hopefully will be the initiative to be able to do even more now when they go back.
Hopefully so. And then we had the match that I was most looking forward to going into it, the kind of Team Hogan versus Team Flair. On Team Hogan, you had Roman Reigns, Rusev, Ricochet, Shorty G, and Ali going up against Team Flair, Randy Orton, King Corbin, Bobby Lashley, Shinsuke Nakamura, and Drew McIntyre. And the reason why I was looking forward to this one, it's got a good range of characters that I quite enjoy watching on a week-to-week basis. I've always been a massive fan of Ric Flair, so pretty much anything he does I'll always be a firm supporter of. But this was actually one of the better matches of the night as well. Some good action. You had some good wrestlers in there that did perform well at the end of the night. They were given plenty of time, nearly 20 minutes, even Shorty G in his rather interesting costume got quite a few licks in. So a good match. And at the end of it was Roman Reigns pinning who did he pin? Randy Orton, wasn't it? After the spear. So quite an eventful match. And give us your quick thoughts on this one then, John.
I was actually expecting Team Flair to win, so I was a bit surprised when they did Team Hogan. I know that I know the way the night had been going, it almost seemed too perfect, so that's how I was thinking about it. But obviously, I didn't see the main event coming either, so that's probably why. But I actually enjoyed the match. I was a little bit worried about it because you get a 5-on-5 match just 3 weeks before Survivor Series, and you think, blimey, you've got to try and sell that now, and how are you going to do that after Hogan and Flair have got their own teams? So I was a bit worried that they were doing it so short distance between there and Survivor Series, but overall a lot of good performances in there. I think like a few of the guys stood out, the ones you want to see, like you say, Shorty G, but also Randy again showing just how he's somebody you wonder. I know with all the speculation where his stock is valued at the moment in WWE, but he's always been in and around. Whether he can always be the guy to carry the company is another thing, and I think we all kind of know why. If you've seen Randy Orton's career in and out of the ring, there's always been that stop-start, but he's just such a crisp worker. But what I will say is Drew McIntyre. When you look at Drew standing next to Randy, and you think, blimey, this guy is huge, because Randy Orton's a big guy, and then you see him next to Drew, and you think, man, that guy's got presence. Why are they not doing anything with Drew McIntyre? Why have they not pushed that button yet? That stood out for me a lot, and I hope that somebody somewhere, is watching the same thing I am. I'm thinking maybe next year, 2020, is the year for Drew now in that main event level as far as the title goes.
Yeah, I think if Paul Heyman being in charge of Raw has anything to do with it, I think he's definitely got a good year ahead of him, and hopefully he'll have a good run through to WrestleMania anyway. But fingers crossed, whether it's a World Championship bout or maybe a secondary title, I think he needs to have some gold around his waist just to kind of he deserves it. Because he's got the look, he's got the presence, he's got the wrestling moves. I do fear that WWE might be concerned that he's a bit injury prone, though. He has had a few injuries over the last couple of years. That big one that kept him out while he was NXT champion, of course, and he's had a couple of minor ones since returning to the main roster, so we shall see on that one. But then we go to the main events, and this was a rematch from their Hell in a Cell match. The Fiend, Bray Wyatt versus Seth Rollins. So Seth going in as the champion, but the Fiend coming out as the Universal Champion and finally putting right all the wrongs from last month at Hell in a Cell. Coincidentally, on Halloween, the 31st of October, you still had that annoying red light though, John, which kind of was a little bit distracting. The match was kind of mostly fought on the outside of the ring, and there was some shenanigans over by the stage with the Fiend crashing through some speakers. There was sparks, there was pyros and flames, and then in kind of a nice bit of camera trickery, the Fiend kind of rises up behind Seth, hits the Sister Abigail, and wins the match from there. So the ending was better than the rest of the match combined, in my opinion. But the Fiends, we finally got what we were after from last month. They finally put right their wrongs from the Hell in a Cell match. But give us your quick thoughts on this one and our new champion.
Yeah, I feel even more for the fans that turned up to Hell in a Cell now, because when they see this, they'll think, why didn't we get that kind of result or that ending? But yeah, I mean, I might sound like I'm agreeing with you too much on this podcast, but like I totally agree with you with that red light. That is a nightmare for me. I just think WWE, it's one of those things, because they can do it, they think they should always do it. You know, just because you can doesn't mean you have to. So I don't mind it in the entrance, and I don't mind it between the matches, but I think in the match it does take me out a little bit of the character and just watching it. I know what they're trying to do, but for me, probably just my purist wrestling side coming out here, but I don't enjoy the visual of that. However, I was pretty shocked that we had a new Universal Champion by the end of it. I'll say that much. I didn't see that coming. I thought the best case scenario would be the Fiend wins, but it'll be, you know, he won't go away with the title. So the fact they've done that, I think that's a huge statement right there. It does seem like, you know, Bray Wyatt, he's been around for so long now, and finally he's finally got it, because, you know, he's sort of turned into one of those characters that promised so much and delivered so little. And finally, he's now got, again, he's had to stop and start again and again and again. But finally, it seems like WWE have gone, here you go. You're having it now for a change. Seth Rollins losing it. I mean, I think, to be honest with you, I know a lot of people have been talking about Bray Wyatt, but I'm actually focusing on Seth Rollins and thinking, what does this say about him at the moment and where the company are valuing him? It is surprising, because you look where Brock's placed now and he's back there, and you look where Seth Rollins is. I just wonder, I'm more curious to know about Seth Rollins going forward. But I'm totally happy for Bray Wyatt himself. I think it's finally you've seen a story and it's prevailed, and we'll see how it goes. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
Smackdown.
Yeah, I'm more than happy with the end result. But I mean, on the Seth Rollins subject, and I speak about this most weeks on the podcast, I do think he's due a makeover. I do think that with his antics of late, certainly a Hell in a Cell and burning down the Firefly Funhouse, I do think he needs to be turned as a heel. I think he's getting quite a few boos out there, so they need to go with it. And I think it will be kind of a bit of a bit of a refresh, a bit of a reboot for Seth Rollins as well, which I think is what he most needs. And I think he's more of a more dynamic on the mic as a heel as well. I do find him quite boring and quite whiny on the mic as a babyface. So we shall see what happens. But the one thing I don't want to see, John, is another match between these two.
Yeah, I'll second that, I think, as well.
Right, so I think we'll agree that Crown Jewel, it had its moments, certainly had its talking points. There were some historic moments, some kind of shock moments as well. But at the end of it, like I say, we got a new Universal Champion and the champion that we wanted last month, but we got it this month, October 31st that was. So I think overall it was a good show. But it's disappointing that they had some of their matches kind of on Saudi soil instead of on the US. Like I say, I would have loved to have seen Kane versus Brock at WrestleMania, but like I say, they could possibly go the Goldberg route and build it into a more prolonged storyline, possibly for them to face again next April. But let's have a little chat about AEW, shall we? Yep. So AEW is into its fifth week as Dynamite on TNT. So this week's episode opens with Cody and Dustin getting out of a private jet in Charleston, with Cody and Tony Schiavone getting into a limo on their way to the arena, telling Dustin that they will see him later on. Then we get a recap of how last week's show went off the air, with Pac and Moxley going to a time limit draw, with the show coming to an end. Hangman Page coming out to challenge Pac at the end of last week's episode to a match at Full Gear next Saturday. Now, much of the post-match shenanigans took place when the show went off the air on TNT. However, for international viewers like myself watching on Fight TV, we did see what transpired afterwards, and it does appear that we're going to be getting Hangman Page versus Pac, their rematch at Full Gear as well next weekend. Then we get the Dynamite debut of sorts of Big Cheese, big head honcho Tony Khan. You didn't see him, but you heard him behind his office door as John Moxley storms into his office. And after his match with Pac from last week, with Tony Khan telling Moxley that his match against Kenny Omega at Full Gear will be a non-sanctioned lights out match. Moxley didn't appear to react too well to Tony Khan's message, with Tony telling Mox that it wouldn't count against his win-loss record and will not be recorded in the history books, as the AEW boss couldn't sanction the violence between him and his opponent. And Moxley warns Tony Khan that whatever happens to Kenny Omega at Full Gear will be on his hands. So, John, we're only 3 minutes into the show. Most of it is a recap from last week and things that we didn't see behind the scenes. We've already covered a lot of ground setting up this week's show, but also setting up a lot from Full Gear. So I have to ask you, firstly, your thoughts on those couple of opening segments, but also a character like Jon Moxley. Why would he care too much about a win-loss record in the first place? He comes across as his persona is built around being unhinged and beating people up. I wouldn't have thought that a character like him would have given two thoughts or a second thought about a win-loss record. You thought his kind of only frame of mind should be what he's going to do to Kenny Omega next Saturday. But to give us your thoughts on that opening video package and opening segment, John.
Sure. Well, I loved the whole thing with those guys coming in with Tony Schiavone, the way it was shot from the jet, because obviously old NWA, it's just a throwback to that, and it's different, and it makes them look like bigger stars. At the end of the day, if you're watching on TV, you're the casual viewer, it makes them look gigantic all of a sudden, like it's a big company. The Jon Moxley thing, I don't know if he cares. The point of view, I have no idea. I don't know why they kept having to use the win-loss thing. I think if it would have been maybe more sense if it was like, I just want to create anarchy and I don't want to have any suspension after it or whatever. But why they threw those lines in, I have no idea, because again, AEW has always been about, it's always the win-loss matters. So it seems a bit of a cheap way out if they're going to just be like, well, unsanctioned, don't worry about it, it's not going to matter if you lose. Yeah, I'm a little bit sort of iffy about that. And but what I did like is the fact that when Jon Moxley went in there, you didn't see Tony Khan, and it was all sort of mic'd. Yeah. It reminded me of like the Bret Hart, the Montreal Screwjob, Wrestling with Shadows. Reminded me of that moment, and I thought that was good. That was clever, because how many times in WWE do they do those segments and there's a camera in the room, just so happens to be inside. So I liked the fact that it was shot from a more sort of sports angle, as best as it can. And so you're kind of only imagining what was happening in there and how, the words are coming across. So overall, I think it was I think AEW, for me, each week it comes on and they do these videos to set themselves up. I think they've done that perfectly well. I like it because it gives a more realistic feel and makes them different, as opposed to NXT, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that you touched on earlier was the Cody and Tony Schiavone segment. And later on in the show, we saw them kind of chatting in the back of a limo. It just seemed very personable, very, very, they've obviously known each other for decades. Tony Schiavone obviously having a long working relationship with the Rhodes family. And that was what a lot of the conversation was about. And I really enjoyed that. It kind of reminded me of, some of the journeys that Ric Flair would have from his home to the arena. Some of the conversations that they would have in the back of the limo, and it really kind of took me back to that. And I think they were going for that sort of vibe, that sort of look and that sort of feel. And it definitely worked for me. I really loved that kind of Tony Schiavone and Cody kind of segments throughout the show. But going on to our first match of the night on Dynamite with Sammy Guevara versus Hangman Adam Page. So this was a match between two of the brightest talents, in my opinion, in all of pro wrestling right now, with AEW really getting behind the Hangman as a future world champion, in my opinion, and Guevara clearly making his name as part of the Inner Circle, alongside Jericho, Santana, Ortiz, and Jake Hager, of course. I really think that AEW have done a really great job in presenting new talent to us. That's one of the things that they've really succeeded in with Dynamite, and especially Guevara being a really standout talent since Dynamite started about a month ago. Before then, we probably heard about him. We'd probably seen him on YouTube wrestling independent matches, and we know that he was a former lightweight champion over in AAA in Mexico. But we hadn't really seen a lot of Sammy Guevara, but they've really shone a light on Sammy. So give us your thoughts on Sammy Guevara in particular, and what I said about kind of newcomers, new talent really being shone a light on, certainly since AEW Dynamite started.
Yeah, it's funny because I've heard a lot of people complain about the fact that AEW don't do a good job with that sometimes. But for me, I'm the opposite. I feel like, MJF and Hangman Page, all these talent, they're doing right by them. And what's amazing is no matter how good some of these guys are, they're not just throwing everything on them all at once. They're taking their time. They're building story arcs for a change. Whereas what tends to happen, as we was talking about WWE earlier, they'll put a little bit of hype behind someone for a month, and then we may not see him again for a little while. They may just get put back in the shuffle. And I think AEW, what they're doing well here is they're presenting everybody as best as they possibly can individually, with nice bits of grey in it, because, like, for instance, MJF, I mean, he's associated with Cody. but he's supposed to be a bad guy, but then he's associated, and I like that. I think it's much more realistic because you're seeing relationships as opposed to I'm a good guy and I'm a bad, and you know what I mean. So
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think I like the fact that the character, they're playing it more, and it seems more natural. Obviously, one of the big things on our podcast that we always talk about with a lot of the new guys on AEW is the fact that the freedom of the mic. I mean, it's just chalk and cheese. And when you hear, some of the new guys, especially from the inner circle, I mean, you look how Jericho put each one of those over. It was perfect. Nobody even had to say anything after that because Jericho just did such a great job. So now, after he's done that, we want to find out about these individually. And, they can do it between bell to bell, but they can also have these little moments, backstage as well, just for the association. So I think AEW at the moment, for me, with all the new guys, are building, a perfect arc. I mean, you look at Darby Allin as well, somebody a lot of people didn't know anything about. I was fortunate enough to see him at a Progress show earlier this year, and I didn't know that much about him. But again, he's another guy who is himself, and he's got a deep-rooted story. And I feel like AEW have done a great job of presenting him and his background perfectly well. I think if you put him anywhere else in another promotion, maybe they wouldn't have got it. They might have had to have a more gimmick for it, and it may have got lost. But I think AEW, with all the new talent so far, has been so good at the moment for me.
Totally agree. Well, this was a fun match. Went about 8 minutes, and Hangman Page won the match in the end with his. I think he used his buckshot lariat to win the match. Sammy Guevara, like I say, we were bigging him up earlier on, but unfortunately, he was on the losing end. That's the only kind of gripe with me is that he's a character that AEW appear to be getting behind. He's part of the inner circle that are really over at the moment, but maybe they could have given a different opponent to Hangman for him to defeat on this episode. But nevertheless, a bit more exposure for Sammy. He did get some licks in. He did get some good moves in. Now I thought it was a pretty solid match. But what were your thoughts on this opener, John?
Yeah, for me it was solid. I think for a Dynamite show. What's interesting about what you say about giving him maybe a throwaway type thing. What's fascinating is AEW seem like they only want to put out name against name every week, and I think as wrestling fans, I don't know if that's just because the way we think somebody should be built because of the way we've been educated with WWE for so long. But in actual fact, I mean, I'm staying optimistic that even though he's got the loss, he's got the L next to his name, that it still may prevail in the future, that wasn't a bad thing, and we may get used to the whole win-loss thing more and more, because Kenny Omega, for instance, majorly established wrestler, and Jim Ross just calls it out every time. Oh, he hasn't had a good year. Now, there's no way on the other show they would ever call something like that out. They would only focus on the strength. So I like the fact that I'm sitting at home and the announcers are saying what I'm thinking. And so even though he's lost that match, hopefully, I still think AEW know what they're doing. I think they've mapped out very well for a long time, at least 1 year for me.
Definitely. And after the match, Hangman Page gets on the mic to acknowledge that things haven't been going so well for him lately. But at Full Gear, he's going to do some cowboy shit, he says, and he's going to take Pac's head off. So that's one match I'm definitely looking forward to. And the Full Gear card is definitely stacking up. It's looking pretty good. I do have my kind of question marks over some of the stipulations they're adding. Some of it may be unnecessary, but we'll talk more about them a little bit later on. On to our second match. And it was Hikaru Shida versus Shana, and this was Shana's AEW debut. So this was another good match, and it was a win in the end for Hikaru Shida, and she struck her running knee for the 1-2-3. I felt the match kind of got better as it went along. But I was quite impressed with Shana. I know that she's done quite a bit of work on the Stardom over in Japan. But give us your thoughts on this one. I mean, and I'm also interested to know, maybe we've spoken a little bit about new people getting the rub on AEW and really kind of them shining a positive light on a lot of newcomers. But what's your thoughts on the women's division and how the women's division is developing so far on AEW after this match, and John?
I think in general the women's division is a little bit behind, but they have only just started, so you've got to give them a bit of time. But they definitely have the talent. What made me think they had the talent is when I saw that Battle Royal. one of the pre-shows. I couldn't believe the amount of talent that they had, and I didn't know that they'd had all them signed. So they definitely have them there. It's just a case of time. And again, AEW Dynamite, it is only 2 hours. They look like they're only given a certain slots at the moment for the females, but that's not to say they're not putting their eggs in one basket with it. I think they will get it to the top. I think they will focus on it, much like their tag teams. But I think it's going to have to take a little bit more time. I don't think they're at the level where the WWE are at currently, but I do think developing characters, there's no rush with this kind of stuff. If you want them to mean something more, you're going to have to take your time. But they probably got to really decide who are top 2-3 female wrestlers, and from that point then move forward. And so you develop a tier system. I don't think that's something that's missing for me at the moment. There's no ladder, there's no tier system to where any individual is currently.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised on last week's episode that they threw away Britt Baker versus Riho for a championship match, kind of on an episode of Dynamite. You would have thought that they've been building Britt Baker for a number of weeks or months now as kind of like one of their key women within the women's division that will eventually become the world champion, no doubt. But you would have thought they would have kind of developed a storyline, kind of building into a pay-per-view program, possibly with Riho or wherever the champion might be in the future. I just thought that was a bit of a waste, to be honest with you. But like you say, I think they've got it right with the tag team. They get it right with some of the newcomers and some of the shiny new toys. But with the women's division, just a few tweaks needed. But then speaking of the women's division, we got a rather bizarre kind of video package with Brandy Rhodes appearing to almost be possessed as she appears to cut off chunks of her hair with makeup running down her face as she screams into the camera. The commentary team draw comparisons between Brandy and Awesome Kong, who she may be aligning herself with in the future. I know that she introduced Awesome Kong at Double or Nothing, of course, to be part of that three-way match back in May. And this might also explain her kind of out of character, out of nowhere attack of Jamie Hayter from last week. And then we get Santana and Ortiz from the Inner Circle, of course. They attack Hall of Famers, the Rock and Roll Express, on the stage as they were about to talk about their role in presenting the AEW tag team belts to the winners of the tournament final later on that evening. Ricky and Robert get attacked with a loaded sock, and Ricky Morton also gets driven through part of the stage near the entrance, and the Young Bucks came out to make the save and to chase Santana and Ortiz off and to make the save. So what were your thoughts on what we saw with the Brandy Rhodes video, first of all, and then what we saw with the attack on the Rock and Roll Express? There seems to be a lot of these type of attacks where people are coming up from behind, whether it's before a match, during an interview, or kind of after a match. And we kind of saw a lot of it on NXT this week as well, where there's kind of a lot of people running down and making the attack. Give us your thoughts on kind of those two segments anyway.
Well, I think with Brandy, I'm kind of happy finally she's going to be doing something, because I think the only problem with her is, much like Stephanie McMahon, you see her out of the ring and she's doing, she's corporate and she's with Cody, and then you see her character, and it's very hard to distinguish what she is. And it's much like Stephanie and Triple H half the time. You don't know if they're heel, babyface. He's a good guy on NXT. He's not. So it gets confusing for the casual viewer that doesn't really know what we know. So I hope with Brandy, because I know she said she's going to pull away from Cody. I hope that now she's going to just focus on her character. We may see that side of her more, and she may, I don't know, she might have to sort of sacrifice taking a step back in the media a little bit more, or try and keep up with that somewhat as best as she can. So yeah, for me, that's a positive step for her. And the segment that you referred to after with the Young Bucks making the set, I mean, I thought that was perfectly done for a change. The Rock and Roll Express like being at it. I mean, see, again, I don't want to keep drawing comparisons to WWE, but sometimes it's just blatantly there and you think, why don't they do this? But anytime there's legends come back in WWE, normally the legends win. And, it's someone like Gallows and Anderson who have to, not being interested with it. But in this case, I thought it was totally the opposite and the right way round this time for me. So, yeah, the legends, putting over the younger guys made perfect sense. And, Young Bucks coming out. I'm really looking forward to that match, actually. It's one of my top matches I'm going to be looking forward to, because, Ortiz and, I mean, they're great. They've been around for so long now, but to see them up against, up against the Young Bucks is going to be really good.
Yeah, that is going to be one of the highlights of the night. Can't wait for that one as well. And then we get kind of a fairly interesting match. Well, interesting in terms of what the good guys were wearing. But we had the Best Friends and Orange Cassidy versus Alex Reynolds, John Silver, and QT Marshall, who are kind of, you could say they're part of jobbers or enhancement, but they certainly weren't named valued wrestlers on the AEW brand. This was a bit of a comedy crossover match. They were trying to promote Rick and Morty, the new series that's going out on the American TV screens fairly soon. I kind of got more into this match, I'll be honest with you, when Orange Cassidy came in. I don't know what it is about Orange Cassidy, but he's kind of growing on me. I know a lot of people probably groan when the name Orange Cassidy is mentioned. It's kind of like that Joey Ryan Marmite thing, either you love him or you hate him. But the combination of Orange Cassidy and the Best Friends did actually win the match in the end. But where do you stand on a character like Orange Cassidy then, John? Is he somebody you love or hate, and is he growing on you?
No, if we're talking about Marmite, I'm on the side of I'm not a massive fan at the moment. But my podcast host, he is, so we're divided there. But like you say, you either love him or you hate him. I don't think he's terribly bad, but I just fall, to relate to as a fan, I fall on the side of not getting behind too much.
Yeah. He's an interesting character. I must admit, it takes a lot of balls to do some of the moves he does with his hands tucked in his pockets. That's one thing, if I was a wrestler, I would not want to take the chance to do, to be honest with you. But he certainly does a good job there. Then we get the official contract signing for the match between Chris Jericho and Cody for the world title at Full Gear, of course, on November the 9th. Jericho calls this the biggest match in pro wrestling of the year, the biggest match in AEW history, and the biggest match of Cody's career. So Jericho tells Cody that he's going to sign the contract to teach Cody a lesson of what it's like to be a loser. And Le Champion says that he has poise, he has grace and class before extended his hand for the challenger to shake. But just then we have Sammy Guevara come back up on the video wall up on the Titantron, and we get a glimpse of Jake Hager putting a beating in on Cody's brother Dustin out in the parking lot, with Hager nailing Dustin with a low blow, which seems to be his move of choice, especially after his appearance at Bellator last Friday, which is how he disabled his opponent during that fight. He also drove Dustin's head into the side of the limo and then slammed Dustin's arm into the car door. Cody eventually came down to help out his brother. Jericho, in the contract signing, was his heelish best self. I think he's the best heel there is in the business at the moment. Loved everything he did. Cody pretty much left all the mic work to Jericho. I don't think Cody said a word on the mic during that segment. I liked the added element of the kind of the beatdown of Dustin out in the parking lot. Added that sense of kind of realism, added a bit more fuel to the fire and a bit more heat to the main events for next Saturday's Full Gear. So give us your thoughts on this segment. I thought it was different to the contract signings we might see on WWE, where there's a table in the center of a ring and inevitably somebody gets powerbombed through it. That didn't happen on this occasion. The attack took place outside of the arena involving Cody's brother, but quite an interesting segment.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, it's all re-educating for us because they're really trying to be different, which is good. I like the way it was presented, the fact that it was, it wasn't in the ring, it was on the stage. Like that just the look of it made it seem different for me. Like I was more intrigued. The fact that he left Jericho to the mic was perfect, because sometimes you can always put too much in it. Now I'm waiting for next week to sort of, maybe we'll hear from Cody this time. And so, they kind of leave you wanting more, which is kind of how a lot of the shows used to be done, that you and I may more remember from a lot of the older days on Monday nights. But that's a good sign. I mean, I enjoyed the whole thing. There wasn't too much in there that I thought was too much or too little. I thought they just got it right. And I'm interested to see where they go with Cody and Jericho. I'm pretty sure Jericho will retain when we get there. But it's good that they're throwing. I mean, they're not holding back. They're putting matches on now that, a lot of people may consider, they should save it. Are they going to have enough? In my opinion, of course they're going to have enough. They've got this whole hungry younger talent all ready to come up. But the fact they're playing on their names first, I think makes perfect sense. So to have Cody there and Jericho against each other is absolutely fine at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the way they've built this main event has been absolutely spot on. The other thing that came out this week was an added stipulation for that main event match, where it's being set to a 60-minute time limit.
Yep.
If it goes to a time limit draw, there is going to be like a boxing style votes between some legends that will be sat at ringside, names to be announced. Does that almost kind of set it up to go the full distance? In which case, is 60 minutes too long a match for a show like that, or is it just there to swerve us and it'll probably only take 30 minutes to end, and maybe there'll be some shenanigans at ringside depending on who the judges are? But what's your thoughts on this added stipulation and how you think that might develop?
Well, like I said at the beginning, the NWA stuff, it's all coming back again.
It
it's
is
the same they used to do all the time. Famously, obviously, Terry Funk, when he attacked Flair at the time, that sort of rings a bell. So like you say, I'm interested to know who these judges are. Are they just going to be legends coming back doing it, or are they going to be somebody who's active? I don't know if they're going to be clever and just use it as a decoy and have you as a viewer thinking about that all the time, and then we may just get something out of nowhere. They could do that. They could be really clever and kind of go quite a long time, and then just, when you think it's going to end, it's all going to be on points. They're going to throw a curveball and someone's going to, win the match. So there's quite a fascinating element to this for me. I don't think it's as plain sailing. I don't think it's as easy to say it'll just go to a draw and we're going to hear from judges. I just don't see him doing that. I don't see that being a spectacle to want to watch at the end of a pay-per-view, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think the perfect wrestling match is 25 to 30 minutes, to be honest with you, as long as there's chemistry between the two opponents. We shall see. But, I mean, we've seen a lot in the build-up to this match from the Inner Circle and from Cody's like DDP and MJF and Dustin. So it's probably going to be some shenanigans at ringside. But I do like the characters of Cody and Jericho, and I think they're going to have a good match. So I'm looking forward to that one for sure. The next match on the card was the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega versus Angelico, Jack Evans and Kip Sabian. So all three of the elites come out in full fancy dress costume, with the Bucks coming out as their favourite Street Fighter characters. It's been a while since I played Street Fighter, so I wasn't sure of who they came out as. Was it Ken and somebody? But and then I've been assured by my boys that Omega came out as Sans from Undertale, which is another computer game which I'm not familiar with at all. I'm showing my age here, definitely. There's plenty of high-flying action from Jack Evans and Helico. They're going by the name as Hybrid 2 now. I don't know if they've always had that name, but that's the first time I kind of caught wind of it on this episode, along with Kip Sabian. Now, Kip Sabian only suffered a dislocated finger on an episode of AEW Dark from a couple of weeks ago. So he's made a quick recovery, or maybe it wasn't as serious as it was first made out, but good to see him back in the ring. A really good British talent making a name for himself in AEW. The match soon breaks down between both teams as Kenny Omega puts in an inverted figure four he gets put into an inverted figure four from Angelico. There's a huge spear from Matt Jackson before the Bucks get a close near fall from their risky business double team. Kip Sabian nails Matt Jackson with a reverse rhino before Omega drops all three of his opponents with snap dragon suplexes, one for each of them. Kip Sabian attempts a somersault plancha over the top rope, only to be caught by both of the Young Bucks in midair before being driven into the edge of the ring apron for his trouble. However, Kenny Omega brings an end to the match with his V-trigger and one-winged angel on Jack Evans for the win for the Elite. So a good match. You kind of know what you're going to get when you've got the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega in the ring. I thought that I was really impressed with Kip Sabian in this match. Thought he really shone. Really enjoyed what Jack Evans had to offer. My only kind of problem when you've got kind of fast-paced performers such as Angelico, Jack Evans, and the Young Bucks is that the story kind of loses its way a little bit, and it's more about the action going 110 miles an hour. So I mean, that's kind of my only kind of qualms when I see the Young Bucks going up against the Lucha Brothers. Is it's just kind of high spot after high spot and not much selling. But I did enjoy this match, like I say, more for the younger talent, the Kip Sabians and the Jack Evans of the world, although they're on the losing end. But I'd love to know your thoughts on this one, John.
Yeah, AEW are pretty good at the moment of putting these 6-man tag matches on, and what you're going to get in the ring is going to be quality. I think for me, there's not enough story, but then I think if you want to drag that viewer who's maybe not wrestling prone, I think this is what those people are going to enjoy the most in a lot of ways, because it is fast paced, and even though I'm a bit of an old school fan, realise that if you're a new viewer, you need that fast pace. You need to get people interested, and this is one of the ways they can do it. One thing you meant about Rick and Morty and stuff like that they've got in the show. What I tend to see AEW doing a lot is their demographic is the audience. I feel that WWE have lost out on. They've been very meticulous about where they're positioning their venues next to universities, colleges. They're trying to get 18 to 28-year-olds back into it again, and that's a market that you don't often see that much in wrestling anymore. You obviously very small children and people like us that are still been fans, and that's it. But it's very hard to find that demographic, and I think AEW, by putting these matches on, although for us we're thinking there's no story here with it, I think it does certainly tailor towards that viewer who's just going to be channel surfing and just come on TNT to see this, because that may be their fix for them.
Yeah, you make some good points. So after the match over, the action didn't stop there. The Young Bucks start to celebrate around ringside with the fans when Matt and Nick, they get pulled over the guard railings by a couple of fans in Rick and Morty masks who turn out to be Santana and Ortiz, who put in a bit of a beating on the Bucks before the former LAX retreat to the back as Omega comes to the rescue. So that was a bit more heat to their match that you're very much looking forward to for Full Gear next week. Before the main event, we get Jon Moxley in the ring with a live mic to talk about his lights out unsanctioned match against Kenny Omega, the pay-per-view, and how his match will not count in the record books and will be counted as if it never even happened. He said Moxley goes on a bit of a tirade against the bosses, against the suits of AEW, and he tells the fans that he's the baddest and sickest son of a bitch in the game. Moxley tells us on November the 9th he's going to beat Kenny Omega to within an inch of his life, and Kenny Omega's blood will be on AEW's hands. So I'd say he's always been a good promo, our Dean Ambrose, Jon Moxley, whatever you want to call him, and he certainly turned up the notch a little bit here since he's been on AEW. I thought this promo delivered. What were your thoughts on this kind of promo from Jon Moxley here, John?
Yeah, I've got to say, first and foremost, Dean Ambrose, for me in WWE, I was not a huge fan of these. I just sort of lost touch with the character he was trying to do, and wearing the t-shirts with lunatic fringe on it. I just thought, where are they going with this? If you are one, you are one. You don't need a t-shirt to market it more. So since he's been away, it's sort of rejuvenated my belief into the Jon Moxley character that he was before. I liked this. I know a lot of people said this was the best promo of the entire week. Some people saying the best of the year. I'm not sure I'd go that far, but certainly we haven't heard from Jon Moxley with a live mic out there yet. I think this might have been the first time in the ring. So it was kind of cool that it's taken all this time to get to this stage, which again, slow burning for AEW. They're not just pushing everything out in front of us all at once. I quite liked it. It was nice to see him just being himself. You could tell that. There's no waiting, pacing, taking breaths between each speech. It was just he was talking, and much more relatable. He looks like so much more of a bigger star in AEW than he ever did in WWE, in my opinion. Even with the title, he just looks like a huge star there. So I'm fascinated to see where he goes again next week and what they've got him doing.
Definitely looking forward to that one. And then we head into our main event now. Of course, this is the final of the tag team tournament to crown the first ever AEW tag team champions. The tournament's been going on for about 3 weeks now, 3 or 4 weeks. We get fire and pyro for the Lucha Brothers entrance. No such fireworks for SCU. However, we do get the big match introductions from Justin Roberts. John, I don't know about you, but it wasn't the kind of the final that many of us were predicting. I think a lot of us were looking forward to maybe a Young Bucks versus Lucha Brothers final. However, after the Young Bucks surprisingly went out to Private Party in that really good first round match a few weeks ago, and then we kind of saw the pre-match beatdown from Rey Fenix and Pentagon on SCU before SCU's first round match. It kind of did build a nice story so that by the time we got to the final and the two kind of opponents sanded across the ring for one another, you did have that ready-built storyline going into the final, which kind of added that extra element of drama. But going into it before the tournament started, who were your picks? Who were your favourites to go all the way?
Well, I was looking at Pentagon as well. I certainly looked at those two, but also something the Young Bucks and Cody have been really good at is they've shown that they're willing to put over the other guys. They're not there to sort of make themselves stand out and look the ultimate best. And I think they made that statement in the rounds leading up to this when the Young Bucks went out early, that was going to be the case. So I think from there, I've kind of thought to myself, they're going to throw something unpredictable at us. I've enjoyed it, to be honest with you, because it's fresh and they've got a lot of good tag teams. I mean, they are doing so well with them that and there's a lot of matches I'd like to see down the road. So the tournament as a whole has been really good for me. I mean, refreshing. I haven't had a problem. I know that everybody did want to see certain names by the end of it, but I think again, we're all, I know I keep harping on about this, but I think we're all sort of being re-educated a little bit to the new pro wrestling that they're willing to present to us here, and I think we'll be more used to it as we go along. But I thought the whole thing was good. I think the ending of it all, for me, it's a fine result. I don't really have too many. I think it puts somebody else in the limelight now as well, because you've got a lot of talent in the tag team division at the moment that they can go with. I certainly see. I wouldn't be surprised if AEW put on a pay-per-view where there is a tag team title match main event, because they definitely can do it. They've got so much talent.
Yeah, and this is a comment that I've made on the Wrestling with John's Facebook group so many times, that AEW, the tag team division in AEW is absolutely stacked, and they, it's just the highlight of the week most weeks, to be honest with you. And they don't just have one tag team match. I think out of the average of 5 or 6 matches per show, there's easily 2 or 3 matches of those are tag team matches, as we found out again this week. So they really put in a lot of emphasis on tag team wrestling, and it's been absolutely top notch so far. However, SCU came out the winners on this match, and they did beat the Lucha Brothers in a really entertaining match. I was half expecting Christopher Daniels to come down and get a little bit of revenge on the beatdown he had prior to the first round encounter a few weeks back. But to a lot of people's surprise, SCU did beat the Lucha Brothers and are the first AEW Tag Team Champions. And it'll be interesting. I've kind of got my thoughts that these two might have a rematch at Full Gear. It'll be strange not to have the tag team titles defended on Full Gear. I don't think any tag team title match has been announced yet, but with the former LAX, Santana and Ortiz going up against the Young Bucks, I wouldn't be surprised if these two teams face each other again next Saturday. But give us your thoughts on this final of the tag team tournament. And John, I thought it was a pretty good match. It had a lot of drama to it. I thought the match really picked up when Scorpio Sky got in there. Kazarian was carrying a lot of the match for his team and getting beat down, with the Lucha Brothers kind of dominating a lot of the match, keeping Kazarian in their half of the ring and kind of performing really well as a tag team, as they do. Like I say, you had your high spots there, you had your drama, you had your big moves. But Scorpio Sky won the match in the end for his team. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I thought the match was excellent. The one thing I've liked about all the tag matches is they're using logic again. It's not the same formula, wait for the hot tag and you wait for the crowd to build like we see so much of, and it gets a little bit dull. The reason we're all enjoying the tag matches is because they're being quite innovative with their stuff. They're trying new things. And a lot of these teams as well, it's not as if they've just put them together. They've been working with each other for a long time. So you can imagine that they've got a little bit more creative freedom backstage to come up with some crazy ideas. Scorpio Sky, I've got to say, I've been really impressed with him just solo as well. I mean, he looks like somebody who, if you look at any tag teams at the minute, I'd say he's somebody who could branch off on his own. And, certainly in AEW could have a very good singles career as well. But the match itself was excellent. Like I say, lots of logic in it as well, like keep him isolated, do these things. So often you sit there and you think, you spent all that time on one body part, now you're just going to let him, take over on a different one altogether. Like, what's the point of the whole thing? But yeah, the tag teams, one of the key things I've seen with all these matches and the feedback we got on our podcast is that the selling is just so different from what they've seen in other various tag matches. And I think it just makes more sense when you're watching it. For me, I don't have a problem at all with the winners. I think they're going to be great tag team champions. I hope that they leave it on them for a little bit, let them, develop as champions as well. Let them be the guys to really try and beat and have all these up and coming teams, fight for their place against them. Because they could pretty much cement their legacy here, I would imagine, with the first ever.
Yeah, definitely. Like I say, I think more than anything, I'm really stoked about how the tag team division AEW are shaping up. I'm pleased that SCU are the first ever tag team champions, and I'm interested to see what happens going forward. Let's have a look at this week's NXT then, John. So this was another stacked show. We've been used to some amazing shows from NXT, forever and a day, really. But certainly since they've gone to 2 hours on the USA Network, they haven't disappointed. Last week's show was probably one of the best wrestling shows I've seen in a long, long time on my TV screen. But this show opened with American recording artist Poppy. I'm not too familiar with her stuff, but she sang 2 songs, I Disagree and Scary Mask. And Scary Mask was, of course, featured in a bit of an Io Shirai video package from a few weeks ago. And it also gave us the entrance of it led Io Shirai out to her match. And the opening match was a bit of a grudge match. Io Shirai versus former friend Candice LeRae. Now, of course, Io Shirai turned her back on Candice LeRae several weeks ago, and they had a really, really good match at TakeOver Toronto back in August. And I think that was possibly the best match on the card, and certainly one of the best women's matches we've seen in a long time between those two. It was absolutely outstanding. So this match was pretty good as well, with Io and Candice taking turns on nailing big dives through the ropes to start the match off on one another there. There was a lung blower from the second turnbuckle onto Candice LeRae from Io Shirai. We even get a bloody nose on Candice, and she fires back with a tornado DDT for a 2 count. Io Shirai misses a trademark moonsault, with LeRae bringing up her knees to prevent the move. Candice connects with a butterfly facebuster. Very similar to Beth Phoenix's finishing move. I don't quite know how to describe the move that Candice used, but then she tries to hit a Cabrana moonsault, but she landed heavily on a discarded steel chair that was brought into the ring from earlier on in the match, and Io Shirai took advantage of the situation, hooks the legs, and gets the 1, 2, 3. So a good match. I don't think it was as good as their match in Toronto. Wasn't as crisp as their match in Toronto in August, but a good show opener. We then get a post-match appearance from Rhea Ripley, who prevented a further beatdown from Candice by Io Shirai. So give us your thoughts on this one. Like I say, 2 excellent members of the women's roster, and much like the tag division in AEW, I think that NXT pretty much have it nailed with the women's division, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there. I mean, they've been doing it for years and years as well. It's almost like you're wondering how they're doing it, because they lose certain talent to the WWE quote unquote old main roster, and you wonder how they're going to get by it. But yeah, another great solid. I only saw highlights of this match, but from what I saw, it was just like, extremely good. All the feedback we got was excellent. So again, I have my reservations. I'm kind of the only thing I'm worried about is, are they with everything going on against AEW, are they still going to put as much stock into it, and not try and just sort of I guess always respond to what the competition are doing, which I think they tended to do it at least the first 2 NXT shows up against Dynamite were doing. Yeah. I thought a lot of it was in reaction. But finally, I felt like last week was definitely NXT's best one, and this week seems to be they're just sticking to what they know, not worrying too much about what AEW are doing, which is perfect really for us and them as well in the performance. So yeah, I think overall it's a good match. I mean, from what I saw, they blew it out of the park. So
definitely, yeah. And then we had a recap of Finn Balor's heel turn from last week, where Finn said that Raw and Smackdown was like Hollywood, with all the smoke, mirrors, and lights, but NXT was like Broadway, where there's nowhere to hide, and that the Prince was back. Finn was also live on NXT this week to explain his actions following his attack on Johnny Gargano. And Finn told the fans that 2 months ago, he was laying down for the hottest thing in the business just because he got a new mask, referring to Bray Wyatt, the Fiend, I'm sure there. Finn said that he's just taken his mask off, and now he's the hottest thing in the business. Finn addresses Johnny Gargano and called him the heart of NXT. Finn tells Johnny that if he wants to go again, he'll send him right back to the hospital, and he will no longer be called Johnny Gargano or Johnny Wrestling. Instead, he'll be called Johnny Watches Wrestling, the way it was supposed to be. So some pretty, harsh words there from Finn Balor. He's definitely embracing his heel side, bringing back the kind of Prince Devitt character of sorts from his New Japan days. I thought it was a really good promo, a lot of passion there, a lot of fire, and a lot of character, which was a lot more than he showed when he was on Raw or Smackdown. But what were your thoughts on this promo from Finn?
Yeah, much better, and I think it's something that me and my podcast host Matt would agree with, that Finn Balor towards the end, was coming out doing the whole thing with a collar, probably been told to smile too much. That was getting so cheesy. I'm so happy he's gone back. I thought the turn was excellently done. I mean, first of all, like the week before, brilliantly done. The way they shot it and everything, perfect. And I do feel like he's going to get a new lease of life with NXT. He
seems so much happier on NXT again, isn't he? It's like he's got a new lease of life, and like he's been reborn again. Like he's happy, he's found his smile, but not as smiley as he was on the main roster. But you know what I mean.
I think it's interesting as well, because I don't think we've seen Finn Balor as a heel in the entire WWE yet. So this is great stuff for that department as well. So it's a real nice, fresh change for him going forward, and it's a good promo.
Definitely. Then our next match was Shane Thorne versus fellow Aussie Bronson Reed. So in this match, Shane Thorne was quick out the gate on this one, but Reed soon came back and was planting Thorne through the canvas with a huge senton. There was a long series of chops traded between these two, with Thorne eventually getting a close near fall from a massive back suplex on his huge opponent. Bronson even gets a close near fall of his own from a dead eye that even Adam Page, I'm sure, would be proud of. Both wrestlers end up on the top turnbuckle, where Thorne gets he goes for a Hurricane Rana on his bigger opponent, only to be shoved down to the canvas by Reed before the big man comes crashing down onto his opponent with a huge frog splash for the pinfall victory. So a good win there for Bronson Reed. We then get a quick interview with Dakota Kai and Tegan Nox backstage ahead of their tag team championship match against the Kabuki Warriors, which is our next match. And quite a bit has changed for Kairi Sane and Asuka kind of coming back to NXT for this one-off appearance, or it may not be a one-off appearance, but it's good to see them back, and the fans certainly enjoyed seeing them back at Full Sail, but under different circumstances. This time they're not the happy-go-lucky smiley baby faces, John, kind of dastardly heels. You've got Asuka with her green mist, and Kairi Sane, she's not throwing gold coins into the crowd anymore. She's definitely looking badass. So what's your thoughts on their heel turn? And although they got a good reception, they weren't playing up to it here.
Yeah, so it's the hard thing, isn't it, with WWE in the heel? Because like I said about Finn Balor earlier, the problem is with half the time being a heel now is as soon as they turn heel, you suddenly start liking them more. I mean, it's like they should stay the same. I'm sure if Finn Balor was still doing the smiling stuff with the collars, after a time that would get on my nerves more. But now I think it's hard because heels now tend to be cool, and people, they sell merchandise still. So there's always those little things that never used to happen back in the day. You'd only have the babyface selling the merch. But yeah, to see these two, I mean, it's again, much like Finn Balor, it gives them a fresh start, I think. I mean, I think on NXT they're going to be fine because the pacing is just right there. I think if they was on the main roster now, I don't know where they'd end up, to be honest with you. But I think how many guys and girls on that main roster probably wish that they were still in NXT, what's going on right now?
Oh, all of them.
They would have not been called up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not many that can't say no. So, I think to be in NXT right now for anybody at any stage is a good time with the freedom that they're going to have.
Yeah, and we spoke earlier about Cesaro losing to Mansoor on the Saudi card on Thursday, and I think Cesaro would be one easy pick to go back down or go back onto the NXT roster. I think that he'd absolutely revel in it, and I really enjoyed his kind of cameo appearance at TakeOver Cardiff against Ilya Dragunov. I think he really enjoyed that as well. So he probably wouldn't mind going down to Full Sail, or maybe the more occasional appearance on NXT UK. I think that's certainly more of an environment where he can flourish and be more appreciated. But like you say, I do like the interactions we've been seeing between the Kabuki Warriors and, say, Becky Lynch on Raw. I think that's been fun recently. It'd be interesting to see if that develops. But I mean, in this match, it was another good match. The Kabuki Warriors did end up winning the match and retaining their championships. And I think that there was even some green mist involved as well, which led to the pinfall victory, if I'm not mistaken. But then directly after the match, the horsewomen, Shayna Baszler, Jessamine Duke, and Marina Shafir, they come down. They circle the ring with the odds stacked firmly against Tegan Nox and Dakota Kai. And Rhea Ripley then comes down, makes a timely entrance. However, she is attacked from behind by Io Shirai on the rampway. Bianca Belair and Candice LeRae then make their presence known shortly afterwards. We then get a brief stare down between Baszler and Ripley, almost certainly setting up a bit of a championship match between those two soon, I'm sure. And then William Regal, he's kind of had enough of it, gets up onto his podium somewhere in the rafters, shouts down at the women, and announces the first ever women's War Games match between what it looks like the horsewomen, Shayna, certainly Jessamine Duke, Marina Shafir, with the addition of possibly Bianca Belair and Io Shirai going up against Rhea Ripley, LeRae, Tegan Nox, and Dakota Kai, being 4 of the possible 5 that might be involved in that team. So that will take place at TakeOver War Games on the 23rd of November. What's your thoughts on the championship match? You obviously had Tegan Nox, Dakota Kai, both of them coming off of fairly serious leg and knee injuries, going up against the newly formed heels, the Kabuki Warriors, and the kind of the aftermath as well, John.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it sets up nicely for War Games. I think finally, like I said, NXT the last couple of weeks has started to deliver what they are good at, because I did feel like they were just reaction. But yeah, you've got some great talent in all this as well. And I think, I mean, I'm looking forward to War Games. I'm hoping that they don't, this isn't going to be one of those times where all the pressure is on, this talent alone, that there is going to be other matches to support it, because I think they'll need it. But NXT, all the takeovers, they always surprise me of how good they can be. So you never doubt them, no matter what the star range is. But and then they only need really 4 or 5 matches to make a really solid show that you want to see. So I'm looking forward to this. I think, in terms of the storyline and everything, I think it's worked out very, very well. And like I say, the pacing of it's nice. And I'm interested now to see, at War Games where this goes.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm looking forward to it. It looks like we're going to have the first ever women's War Games match. Yeah. Some really good talent in there. Interesting what you say. We might kind of talk about it now and later on, but they could possibly be having a second War Games match involving the men of NXT, which between those 2 matches takes up an awful lot of talent. I know that they've got quite a deep pool of talent on NXT, but they only really highlight a handful at a time, especially on their 2-hour episode of NXT each week. So it'd be interesting to see, what other matches might take place on that show. I'm sure all will become clear very, very soon. But looking forward to that match and possibly a men's War Games match as well. Speaking of 2 really exciting young talents, Tyler Bate took on Cameron Grimes in the next match. So this was a really fun match, in my opinion, between another 2 really exciting young talents. We spoke earlier about Sammy Guevara and various others on AEW who are definitely worth mentioning. These 2 are definitely worth mentioning in that conversation of being kind of really good wrestlers for the future. They're both in their early 20s. We get a close near fall early on in this match for Bates when he hits a Hurricane Rana. Grimes gets a close near fall of his own from a twisting crossbody power slam. He calls it the collision course. I think that's possibly the best that I can describe it, to be honest with you. It's always like a crossbody mixed with the Spanish fly, to be honest with you. Grimes then gets bundled to the outside, allowing Bate to connect with a tope over the top rope. Just then we see Killian Dane appear on the outside, who causes a bit of a distraction, allowing Cameron Grimes to nail his Cayman running double stomp for the win. And after the match, Killian Dane lays in a brutal attack on Tyler Bates on the outside, warning Bates to tell his friend Pete Dunne that he has unfinished business. So once again, 2 really young, exciting, fresh talents on the NXT roster in Cameron Grimes and Tyler Bate. They had an excellent match. I don't think the 2 of them, you put them in the same ring, I don't think they're capable of having a bad match, if I'm honest with you. Then you've got the inclusion of Killian Dane at the end of it, getting involved with another member of British Strong Style, sending out a harsh warning to Pete Dunne, who he's had his interactions with over recent weeks. Give us your thoughts on this little segment here then, buddy.
Yeah, all 3 of them are remarkable. Killian Dane, Tyler Bate, like you say, Tyler Bate, I'm just so happy he's there and he's getting that exposure now, because I think, before, imagine the Tyler Bate being on the WWE roster, Vince and all the rest of it just would have fought. But having this NXT platform with the UK stuff has just gone strength to strength for him. He's so young. That's the thing about Tyler Bate, is you forget how old this guy is. You know,
I mean, I remember watching him in
years.
2015, and I remember watching Tyler Bate when he was about 16 years old.
Yeah.
And I think by then he'd probably already been wrestling a few years. But yeah, I think he's 22 now. So
Yeah,
I mean, that's crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for WWE, you think guys young are like starting their 30s, early 30s. That's young WWE to come up. But here you've got somebody who's been wrestling for so long, so experienced and knowledgeable as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm just looking forward to seeing more exposure for these guys. I mean, hopefully this leads into sort of an interwinding sort of feud as well. I'd like to see now Tyler Bate do more, maybe have that kind of crazy rival or storyline where you can enhance his character a little bit more and develop a little bit more. I think that's the only thing that's missing. But I think, you know, you look at him, I mean, the sky's the limit with him. I still think that. And I think with NXT where it is now, it's perfect timing, absolutely perfect timing.
Yeah, definitely. It's just kind of mind-blowing to think how good he is now and how good he might be in 5 years' time. But I just hope they handle him well. I know that as long as he's under kind of, you know, the reins of Triple H, as long as Triple H has got one eye on him, I'm sure he'll do well. But so let's keep our fingers crossed there. And then we're on to our main event of this week's NXT. And it was a non-title match against the current NXT Tag Team Champions, the Undisputed Era, Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly, against Matt Riddle and Keith Lee. This was only announced on the day of the show itself, or certainly only caught wind of it on the Wednesday. And it was announced that it was a non-title match just ahead of the match. So I'm really, really happy. I don't know about you, John, but to see a lot more of Keith Lee on our TV screens. I mean, certainly since the 2-hour NXT's been on our TV screens, we've seen a lot more of him. We've seen him on a couple of blockbuster matches against Dominik Dijakovic, and that three-way match adding Roddy into the mix last week was off the charts, superb. And before, when they had their 1 hour format, you wouldn't really see a lot of Keith Lee. I know that he had a little bit of time on the shelf on the injury list, same for Dijakovic, but he's absolutely blown it out of the park. He's really delivered. We'll talk a bit about Smackdown later, where he also makes an appearance. Yeah, you have to be impressed with how they're using Keith Lee more since they've gone to 2 hours, John.
Yeah, Keith Lee. I mean, I saw him at Progress recently as well. In the flesh, and he's a big guy. I mean, you don't realise how agile he is as well. I mean, he's built. And Matt Riddle as well. I mean, I'm a huge Matt Riddle fan. Everybody knows that listening to my podcast. I put him over so much, but I think that I love the pair of them together. I think it's really good. I think they complement each other. And you know, I think Keith Lee. I mean, I don't know if he was to get to Raw or Smackdown, whether he just would have a great start for 6 months and then he falls into the whole trap of Rusev and all those other guys that have come in as big guys, strong, and then just get, you know, molded into anything else. Because I think he's more than that. I hope that he stays on NXT a lot longer now because of what's happened, and you know, they just promote him more on their own brand. But yeah, I hope as well that they stay as a tag team a bit longer. I would love to see them in more of a run with the belts and stuff and go up against for the titles. But yeah, it's good to see that exposure for him. I'm very, very impressed with him. I'm interested to see, though, knowing the way the WWE machine works, Keith Lee is someone they'll probably already looked at, penciled in as a potential guy to go to a Raw or a Smackdown. But be interesting to see.
Yeah, and a guy of his size and you know, promo ability and athletic ability as well. I think that they could really do a lot with him on either Raw or SmackDown. However, we've got to stop, you know, looking at Raw and SmackDown as a promotion, because NXT, you know, they're on mainstream TV over in the States on the USA Network. So yeah, keep them on NXT now. I'm not too worried as long as they get paid properly for their efforts compared to what they might have got with a developmental contract or just having signed with the brand. That's what's important. But this match really picks up when Keith Lee gets the hot tag, ploughing through both Fish and O'Reilly as if they weren't even there. Lee he unfortunately misses moonsault before Fish drops the massive Lee with a Samoan drop. That was a feat of strength there, definitely, for Bobby Fish. Riddle gets tagged in. And he hits a series of brotons on both members of UE and a couple of penalty kicks. That was until the NXT champion Adam Cole and Roddy Strong comes down to distract the King of Bros, Matt Riddle. Riddle wants none of it, connects with a brilliant twisting moonsault from the second rope onto all four members of an Undisputed Era on the outside. Keith Lee gets in on the act with a massive kind of run around the ring and a pounce, sending Adam Cole crashing into Bobby Strong and Roderick Strong on the outside. However, with all of the shenanigans going on the outside, on the inside of the ring, Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly, they're able to strike with their high-low double team finisher on Riddle for the pinfall victory. Just then, Tommaso Ciampa comes out to prevent a further post-match beatdown of both Lee and Matt Riddle. The show goes off the air with Keith Lee launching O'Reilly out of the ring over the top rope with Tommaso Ciampa looking down at the NXT Championship in the corner of the ring and tells Goldie that it's going to have to wait, that Goldie is going to have to wait because Daddy is going to war. So that was a hell of a match. A hell of a main event, a hell of a way to close the show. I seem to kind of copy and paste that one line every single week when I talk about NXT because it always is a hell of a match, a hell of a main event, and a hell of a way to close the show. But give us your thoughts on this one, the match, the outcome of the match, and the shenanigans afterwards, John.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the whole part of it. I mean, again, I think it's 2 weeks going now. I've enjoyed NXT a little bit more than I have done the first 2 weeks. So the climax of it and everything else made me much more reminiscent of what I'm used to with NXT, the way it was presented. Again, I'm hopeful that there's going to be more of the same next week. I want them to continue with it and leading up to the pay-per-view as well, like for War Games and stuff. So yeah, I mean, very good outing for me. All of them involved, no problems for me. I'm interested to know from your point of view what you preferred more, AEW or NXT.
Wow, I mean that's a question that I normally ask my guests, but putting me on the spot, it's an interesting one. Now that we've kind of spoken about it and recapped, and I've got your opinion, I did enjoy AEW. Now, last week, my kind of show of the week was definitely NXT, and I think that hands down, I think that had everything from the wrestling, the angles, the heel turn, the main event, the triple threat for the North American Championship. It had everything. So, but this week it's a tough one. I think with everything that we've spoken about through to the limo ride with Cody and Tony Schiavone and that kind of old style feel and the contract signing and the tag team tournament final match, I'm probably going to hand it to AEW this week, just based on kind of them little things that was different and wasn't kind of copy and paste from something that WWE might have done. They are trying to revisit stuff from, 20, 30, 40 years ago and make it work in the modern era, much like we said about NWA Power, trying to bring back what was old and make it new again. And I think that they are trying to go things about business their own way and not kind of copying their competition, which some people have actually accused them of doing, strangely enough. But I felt that they did have quite a unique proposition this week. I found that the matches and the kind of the angle building segments were very, very good. And although I'm the biggest mark for NXT, I've got to hand it to AEW. But what about yourself?
Yeah, AEW again. I've had AEW from the beginning, even with how good NXT was last week. I've had AEW sort of winning every week, but I only think it's hard to compare because one is just literally starting. I mean, I know that AEW is coming along as well, but the established stars are more with AEW. I feel NXT, although we know a lot of these guys, I think for the mainstream audience, they is a little bit of a backseat for them at the moment. But that's not to say in the future that's not going to change. I'm sure WWE have got some tricks up their sleeves to promote that brand even more with the exposure of bigger names going on. So for me, overall, what did I enjoy as a fan? It would have been AEW again, for some of the highlights you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, like I say, they're building towards a big pay-per-view. They're only kind of, I suppose at the time of AEW Dynamite playing on Wednesday, they would have had a week and a half between then and the pay-per-view. So things are building up towards some of their matches, and the angles are getting hotter and hotter. And I really enjoyed Dynamite this week. Not to say I didn't enjoy NXT, it just wasn't as good as last week. Had it been on a par with last week, I probably would have gone with NXT. But two excellent shows nonetheless. I think Wednesdays we are absolutely spoiled, and you're right to to concentrate your podcast on kind of what happens on a Wednesday as well, because it's absolutely fantastic, wrestling action. And but one thing that I wasn't planning to talk about originally when I planned this podcast was Smackdown. Now, Smackdown it's not usually a regular feature on my podcast, to be honest with you. We did cover the debut episode on Fox from a few weeks ago, but last night was a little bit different, and it appeared that a lot of the guys that were over in Saudi Arabia for the Crown Jewel event on Thursday, there was some mechanical issue and some delay issues that meant that they weren't able to get back to the US in time for Smackdown last night, unless, of course, you're Brock Lesnar, who probably jumped on a plane 5 minutes after winning his match against Cain Velasquez and was on his private jet on the way back. So he was the only familiar face from Thursday night. Otherwise, there were WWE regulars like Sami Zayn and Daniel Bryan, who refused to go to Saudi for personal and political reasons, of course. But then news started to break halfway through Friday, halfway through yesterday, that NXT talent were being drafted, being thrown on a plane and sent to the venue for Smackdown. And it kind of made sense because, of course, it was announced on Thursday during Crown Jewel that the next pay-per-view Survivor Series will be Smackdown versus Raw versus NXT, and of course NXT have got a lot more prominence, having been on USA for the last month and a half, couple of months now. So it kind of made sense to have the show built around them, but I think it had a lot more NXT than they were kind of planning ahead of kind of the travel issues from Saudi Arabia. But just to run down some of the key things that happened last night on SmackDown, the show opened with WWE champion Brock Lesnar after his win against Cain Velasquez the night before, essentially quitting SmackDown as WWE champion and saying that he's going to hunt Rey Mysterio over on Raw. Now, this obviously answers a lot of people's questions because after The Fiend won the Universal Championship, and with The Fiend being a SmackDown wrestler, people were saying, well, you've got the SmackDown, the Universal Championship and the WWE Championship being defended on the same brand. That doesn't make sense. Well, they kind of answered that almost straight away on SmackDown last night with Brock Lesnar essentially quitting SmackDown to go and hunt Rey Mysterio on the Raw brand, because of course Rey Mysterio can't possibly be seen on SmackDown because he's not a SmackDown guy. So despite the fact that he's been seen on SmackDown pretty much every week since the draft, apart from now, then we saw SmackDown Women's Champion Bayley defeat Nikki Cross in quite an entertaining match. However, the talking point of that match was Shayna Baszler, the NXT Women's Champion. We've spoken about Shayna, of course, throughout this episode, hopping the guard railings to attack Bayley and Sasha Banks after the match. So possibly setting up a Survivor Series match between Bayley and Shayna Baszler. So that could be quite interesting. I'd definitely be up for that as well. Then we've spoken a bit about Keith Lee and Matt Riddle. They made an appearance, confronted Sami Zayn with Riddle and with Riddle dropping Zayn with a Bro Derek, and followed by a Keith Lee moonsault. Then we had Tommaso Ciampa. He defeated The Miz after appearing on Miz TV and kind of throwing down the gauntlet to the 15-year veteran Miz. And that was a fun match, but Tommaso Ciampa coming out on the winning end there, as you would hope. Rhea Ripley and Tegan Nox defeated Fire and Ice. Then we had the NXT champion Adam Cole taking on, in what might consider the dream match of all dream matches, John, Daniel Bryan in an excellent match. So I don't think anybody could have predicted seeing Adam Cole on SmackDown, let alone defending his championship, let alone defending it against Daniel Bryan and winning the match in a fantastic match. And then to cap it all off, we had Triple H. It gathers all the NXT troops in the ring to send out a message to the rest of the WWE locker room ahead of the next pay-per-view Survivor Series, of course, where it was announced on Thursday that Raw and SmackDown and NXT will be the three brands going up against one another on the 24th of November. So there's a lot to digest there. Kind of what were some of the key things that jumped out at you? I mean, starting with Brock, first of all, obviously answering that question that all of us are asking, what happens to the WWE Championship? He's just moved himself to the other brand.
Yeah, I don't know. I was a little bit surprised. I thought Fox would have been happy to have Brock there, being that he's an MMA guy, UFC background, and I guess for a lot of their sort of audience, sport fans, you'd know who Brock Lesnar is. At the same time, they may have looked at Bray Wyatt and thought, we want some of that as well, so, let's do a trade. It seemed a bit cheap of a way of getting Brock onto Raw, if I'm honest, just say I quit. I didn't know you could do that, but there you go. That's
who's going to argue against Brock Lesnar? Who's going to argue with him, mate?
Exactly. So yeah, he wants this beef with Ray, which is fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I said earlier on in the show for Seth Rollins, it must be a real kick in the face, I think, for those guys that have dealt with Brock, had him as the champion. It's almost like we're going backwards again. I don't have a problem with Brock with the belt, but I'm just wondering, after the Rey Mysterio stuff, who is available, who's ready to take on Brock, especially from the heel face point of view on Raw. So fascinating times there. But I suppose really, the Fiend on SmackDown, hopefully they really build around him now on that show, because they'll certainly have the space to now. So I'm interested to see where they go with Bray on SmackDown as a solo champion, by himself on there against fresh opponents, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. It should hopefully freshen things up. I really don't want to see another Brock-Seth feud. Certainly not this year, or certainly not for the next few years. But what about some of the NXT faces that appeared on SmackDown last night?
Yeah.
So, like I say, if you're a big NXT fan like myself and you, it must have been really kind of a mark-out moment, really, something unexpected and very reminiscent of the failed invasion angle from 2001. But hopefully with Triple H having tight reins of what happens on NXT, won't let it kind of fall by the wayside or be treated the way that angle went down. But give us your thoughts on some of the NXT faces that appeared last night then.
Yeah, like a cruel twist of fate, really, isn't it? The fact that, they're all held up in Saudi Arabia gives NXT guys the biggest opportunity. I'm not sure this would have all happened and the exposure that they got would have happened. I'm sure they had this in the plan, but not as many. And you pretty much would have to say NXT stole SmackDown, ultimately, the whole show. I think, like you say, having Adam Cole on the show, up against Bryan, I mean, that is a dream kind of match right there. You've got, Keith Lee. I felt like Keith Lee and Matt Riddle looked like stars against Sami Zayn. The only problem I had with that is, of all the main roster guys, Sami Zayn is the one guy I would have thought maybe NXT through and through. But other than that, it was fine. I just thought maybe they would have changed characters to who they do that with. But yeah, it was great to see the NXT guys there, and it gives them massive amount of exposure for Fox TV going forward. I'm curious now to see if they get the same kind of deal on Raw, whether that's going to be the same case with Triple H, getting the troops together. Like you said, the invasion thing happened. We've all been there. We all know how not well that went. So hopefully I've learned from their mistakes. I think this could be done really, really well. And this may put NXT over. I think this is the best way of doing it, to say their brand is on a par with Raw and SmackDown. I think this is the best opportunity they've got of doing it, and Survivor Series you might have to put them over, but I think it'll be worthwhile. This might be the thing that cements them from, the development that we know them as to, a distinct brand. This could be the way of doing it, and to show that they've got as good a talent as both rosters.
Yeah, they've got to be treated as equal, especially now they've got the USA contracts. So it'll be really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what matches, happen on Survivor Series, whether it's any champion versus champion matches. But there was kind of one picture that dropped on my Facebook group yesterday, and it was a fan-made picture of the Intercontinental Champion Shinsuke, US Champion AJ, and Roddy Strong, the North American Champion. That would be a great three-way. So just fantasy booking, that would be pretty good. But other than that, we will have to see. I mean, Survivor Series is only 3 weeks away. So they haven't got an awful lot of time to kind of build these matches and build these stories and announce what's going on. So I'm sure we'll see a lot more on Monday and a lot more again next Friday. But it was certainly a pleasant surprise. I kind of saw some rumours before I went to bed last night. When I woke up this morning, it was all over the internet. So I'm really pleased it happened, and they handled it really well. Possibly because Vince McMahon was probably still stranded in Saudi Arabia and he didn't have his fingerprints all over it. It's more to do with Triple H and Bruce Pritchard possibly. But a really entertaining episode of SmackDown. And once again, we get to 2 opportunities, 2 nights of NXT this week, essentially, with their regular NXT show on the Wednesday, and then with what happened on SmackDown last night. So there we go. John, that draws us to our conclusion of this week's Wrestling with Johners. We've covered a lot of ground there, buddy. I want to thank you so much for kind of helping us out. We've covered Crown Jewel, of course, and NXT, AEW Dynamite, and of course we've recapped on what happened with highlights from SmackDown last night. But thank you for helping us out with this week's podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us on. And it's been a journey. This one, I feel like we've been everywhere, but
we certainly have.
I will say I'm excited for next week though. So with what's going to happen here, there's a lot to keep us engaged with.
Definitely.
So hopefully, yeah.
Before we say goodbye, John, do you have any plugs you want to throw out there? Any social media kind of handles? Yeah, so Twitter, Facebook.
Yeah.
Kind of throw it out there, buddy.
Yeah, sure. For anybody that's interested in independent wrestling in the UK, I'm literally going around with WrestleLine. We get interviews with all types of talent. So you can hit us up on WrestleLine channel on YouTube. We're also available on Facebook, just at WrestleLine. Instagram, WrestleLine channel. Twitter, the same, WrestleLine. So hit us up there. And, of course, the podcast that we do weekly as well. You can get us on all the various platforms. I don't know how many of them are available now, but there are like hundreds to when I first started this whole venture into it. I've never seen so many. So, hit us up on there at WrestleLine. But, thank you very much.
No, thank you, John. Thank you. And on next week's episode, of course, it's our special anniversary episode. It's going to be episode 77. I'm going to be joined by Kurt Johansson from Wrestle Thoughts podcast. Now, I think he's part of the Ringsider team out there in the podcast world. And please get your questions in. It will be a special Ask Johners special. So we'll be answering any questions you want to ask about the current wrestling scene, about my kind of wrestling fandom, or about the podcast itself. But that will be dropping next Saturday on all popular podcast platforms, if I can get my words right, and of course YouTube. And so that'll be next week with Kurt Johansson, our 1 year anniversary super show. In the meantime, please keep it tuned to the Wrestling with Johners podcast for all of your weekly NXT and NXT UK, AEW and WWE updates, including WWE and AEW pay-per-view reviews and interviews and so much more. And if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please don't forget to spread the word, tell your friends and tell your family, and don't forget to subscribe to the Wrestling with Johners podcast so that you don't miss out on a single episode. From myself, John Scott, and from my guest, John Scott, it's been a pleasure speaking to you all. We'll catch up with you all again soon. Have a great weekend.